everyone, and welcome back to our town. We are now post-war. We are getting into the 1920s and what that has to bring for us. So during the war, the Great War, the war to end all wars, a lot of men and stuff went off to fight. We all know how it started with one of the Austrian heads of state being shot. So during this time, a lot of, obviously the men weren't there to do any work, so a lot of the women filled roles, and by the time we get to where we are in our town, which is in the late 1920s, in 1921, a lot of the civil service jobs, nearly over 102,000 of them were filled by women, and other land roles as well. And during this time, obviously there were a lot of casualties, so there was a lot of health service in demand, and the monarchy at this point is slightly related to German stuff, so they didn't know how to sort of react to sort of the British mood of not liking the Germans, but that all gets resolved over this time period. So in the 1920s, it is the start of peace and relative economic stagnation. There is, by the end of this year, we're coming into a slight depression, but that doesn't really affect Britain as severely as it does the Americas. There's more Liberal and Labour parties about, as the country kind of has a different mood, a different outset, wanting not to have another war again, and they become one of the two main parties to challenge the Conservatives in politics. There was a Unemployment Act as well, introduced in the 1920s to provide 29 weeks of benefit pay, and it was passed at a time of very low unemployment, so you can imagine they were kind of just doing it for the sake of doing it at that point. Britain at this point was trying to maintain its close relationship with France and the US, as they were their key allies in the war, so they were making sure that things were put in place to try and prevent another war. And in 1925 they got Germany to sign a peace treaty to prevent this happening, but we all know with our wonderful hindsight that this doesn't kind of work out too well. There was a lot of births during this time period as well. Over 1.1 million births happened. This was due to better healthcare and better standards all round as well. The standards of everything was changing, especially the morality of people as well, dramatically changed. And there was to have more personal freedom, not just in their own lives, but control over who they saw, and sexual matters as well, less stuff done by the church and stuff like that. And there was a lot more leisure and literacy, wealth and access to travel, and a broad sense of community grew in Britain after the war and such. So people had a lot more time, a lot more free time to do things, get interested in things, and have time for leisure activities as well. Drinking, is always a fun thing. It always appears every era that we talk about on this series, but it was more defined in your class, how you drunk in this century. So the upper class were going to their swanky 1920s parties and clubs and stuff, whereas the middle and working class were more into pubs and stuff like that. And it was a popular way of spending their extra money or spending their leisure time as well. The annual summer holiday was very common now as well, and people were going to places like Blackpool and stuff, and they were seeing like record numbers as people wanted to spend time with their families and their loved ones. The cinema and radio became more and more attractive. It was classless, ageless, genderless, and provided a lot of new entertainment for everyone in the country as well, especially as you could afford different types of stuff. And it was very popular with young women in this time period as well. So the housing, as there was a very rapid expansion in housing, especially from where we left off at the end of the 1911's, there was only 7.6 million houses being built, and by 1921 there was 8 million houses being built. So there was a rapid expansion in that. And there's also bringing in more council houses as well, with the Tudor Watts report of 1918, the kind of setting standards for these houses because they wanted to avoid the slums of the past. So they were designing short terrace space at about 70 foot or 21 meters in density within a 12 to an acre. So you get about 12 houses per acre with like 70 foot of space. So they were quite spacious houses compared to the rooms that people were living in with like all their generations or more than one family. So it was a big step in the right direction, and they built these places with low rents as well, and to get rid of all the nasty slums that were about, and people would have better time with that all. So there were two main styles of architecture and of art and design and everything in this century. So our earlier one that we kind of missed in the Edwardian era was Art Nouveau, or New Art as it translates to, and it was an integral style of art, architecture and decorating. It was inspired by natural forms and structures, particularly the curves and lines of plants and flowers, and in Britain especially it was kind of a step forward from the arts and crafts of the early Victorian era. So you might be able to see like a similarity between the William Morris prints and how that got pared down and diluted a bit into just using the curves and the lines of the flowers and stuff rather than just splattering prints everywhere. So the first ever Art Nouveau house was built in Brussels by Victor Hot. That's probably butchering his name, and it was a Hotel Tesla, and it's probably still about in its Art Nouveau glory. And there's different elements to an Art Nouveau house. They put a very big emphasis on the stairway and having a skylight underneath. The stairways would be nice and curved and flowing and tree-like and all organic in nature, which kind of represents the whole thing. They'd use like iron columns to represent tree trunks to hold things up. The decorations of the floors and walls are all floral and vegetation inspired as well. And we had a lot of things like Tiffany glass that came about, and lots of prints and greens and pinks and bright colours, natural forms and wood and iron and sort of raw materials going back to big like core trades and stuff. So we also had another style of Art Deco, which I have to admit is my least favourite style ever to be had in the world, and what we're building currently. And this was a even step forward beyond the Art Nouveau into an even more pared down, more modernist way of thinking about architecture and art. So again, its first sort of appearance wasn't in France, in Europe, and it was influencing buildings, furniture, jewelry, fashion, cars, you name it. It was Art Deco, and it was a combine of modernist styles with fine craftsmanship and rich materials. So it was all about luxury, glamour, faith in society, technology, progress, embellishment, especially in America. I think the UK had a lot pared down version of what in the Americas. The Americas is of gold and black, and everyone does like Great Gatsby inspired stuff. So many of the different styles were influenced by bold forms of the Cubist, bright colours of the Futurism, I think that's how you say it, exotic styles from China, Japan, India, Persia, Egyptian and Mayan art. So quite a lot of the style would be quite heavily Egyptian inspired, especially in the Americas and in Britain as well. I think Britain went for a bit more pared down version, but you still buildings like there's one near Mornington Crescent in London that still looks extremely Egyptian and Art Deco, and it's like, oh yes, I live in Camden because I can see that disgusting building. And then it is best known, the style, for its skyscrapers in New York, with their clean lines, regular forms, no decoration on the facades. They were experimenting with concrete at this time as well, and a lot of the buildings, especially in Britain, were whitewashed as well. And the main feature, especially in British versions, were at first they had sort of a more angular sort of front like we have here on this building, but they began to be more curved bay windows, and you'd see them with little ironwork lines on the windows. Some of them would be in blue, some of them would be in greeny, and then some of them would be in the black as well. Especially Miami has a load of Art Deco buildings all in bright colors and stuff. The interior, especially in America, the government buildings, theaters, especially movie theaters, that was super big and getting more popular at that time, and office buildings were extremely colourful, dynamic, combining sculpture and murals, opulent geometric shapes and designs, marble, glass, ceramic, stained glass. So we've got lots of golds, lots of rich woods, lots of fancy, opulent things that flaunts your wealth and denotes your standing in society. And all fun stuff. So some fun facts of the 1920s. We have, in 1920 itself, we have the creation of Welwyn Garden City. That's city a bit further north of London, and the first tenants actually moved in the Christmas of that year, so it didn't take them very long. We're rebuilding new places for people to live. And it was also the first night bus in London. It was the first Bentley car to ever be produced. The first time we ever saw Rupert the Bear in a comic strip. And in the 1921 was the police were patrolling on motorbikes. Unemployment was at 2.2 million, which did decline over that year, but it was quite high. And it was also Bloody Sunday in Ireland. If you know the troubles in Ireland, there was a big division between North and South. This was the bloodiest day, with 23 known to be dead and over 200 homes destroyed. And it was also the first Poppy Day appeal, which we all know now as buying our poppies for remembrance, especially after the war and things. Then 1922 had a flu epidemic where 804 people died. The good old BBC was formed, and King Tutankhamun's tomb was discovered as well, which obviously inspired a lot of the Art Deco-ness of this time period. In 1923, the Radio Times magazine was first published. In 1924 was the first ever shipping forecast and the first ever radio play as well. In 1925, we had the first TV picture, first covered double-decker bus. In 1926, we had strikes and we went into martial law. It was the first British Grand Prix at Brooklands at Weybridge as well. And Agatha Christie was the top writer at this time. She disappeared and was found later, a few weeks later, under her husband's mistress name in Harrogate. And Gill Sans, the best type font, was created as well. In 1927, it was the first transatlantic telephone call. We had a solar eclipse, first automated traffic lights, and 1,600 people were hospitalized because of icy streets. Gotta love a good fun fact like that. In 1928, the Oxford English Dictionary was finally finished, and Heinz Beans was first manufactured. And in 1929, Scotland Yard seized 13 paintings by the author D.H. Lawrence for indecency, because they were nudes of men and women, and the first ever Tesco's was opened as well. So we are coming to the near end of our little time period here, and we'll look forward to seeing you all in the 1930s, and I will leave you with a tour around our town to see how it's changed. So I will see you in the next one. Bye.